As the closing duties at Blooming Memories, a flower shop in New York, were nearly complete on a November evening, Carol Wilson saw off her last customer. The fragrance of flowers lingering in the shop slightly eased her tense nerves. "Mom, look. I drew this picture. Isn't it good?" 6-year-old Robert proudly held up a piece of drawing paper. Carol gently stroked her son's brown curly hair as she took the picture. It showed a disproportionately large turkey and 3 people holding hands. "Who's this?" Carol asked, and Robert answered proudly. "This is you, Mom, and this is me. And this is Grandma. We're going to see her tomorrow, right?" Carol's smile froze slightly. That's right. Tomorrow was Thanksgiving. The day she would return to her mother Patricia's house for the first time in 7 years. Since her husband Michael died in a car accident 7 years ago, Carol had gradually distanced herself from her family. It wasn't just because she was busy. The phone rang, and Carol picked up the receiver. Patricia Wilson's voice came through. "Carol? Are you ready for tomorrow?" There was still a sharpness in her mother's voice. Carol took a deep breath before answering. "Yes, I'm ready. I think we'll arrive by afternoon. Vanessa is looking forward to it. It'll be her first time meeting your son, after all." The moment Carol heard her sister's name, she felt her stomach tighten. Her relationship with Vanessa, who had been their mother's favorite since childhood, was complicated. "Yes. Robert is looking forward to it too," Carol lied. In reality, she had barely mentioned her mother and sister to her son. After hanging up, Carol looked out the window. New York City was already decorated for Thanksgiving. She couldn't help but remember the last Thanksgiving before her father died. It had been 10 years. After her father's sudden death, her mother and Vanessa grew closer, and Carol became increasingly disconnected from the family circle. "Mom, what's Grandma's house like?" Robert's question brought Carol back to reality. "It's a beautiful house in a quiet town in Pennsylvania. It has a large garden and a small forest in the back." Carol smiled at her son, but deep inside, anxiety was swirling. There must be some reason for her mother's sudden invitation. Patricia always had a reason for everything she did. "Let's pack our bags," Carol said. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." That night, after Robert went to bed, Carol opened an old photo album. It contained pictures of a seemingly happy family, but looking closely, her mother's gaze was always directed at Vanessa, and Carol herself appeared somehow out of place. She had decided to visit for Robert's sake. She wanted him to know family bonds, even if they weren't perfect for her. Maybe it will be different this time, Carol told herself. We're adults now. The next morning, Carol and Robert headed to the outskirts of Scranton, Pennsylvania. As the scenery gradually changed from urban hustle to lush countryside, Carol's mind was pulled back to the past. How her sister was always praised while she was criticized. "Why can't you do this as well as Vanessa?" her mother would say. During such times, her father would secretly put his arm around Carol's shoulders. "Mom, the sky is changing color." Robert's voice echoed in the car, and Carol came back to herself. Pure joy was visible on her son's face. At the very least, she wanted to make Robert's first Thanksgiving special. After a 3-hour journey, they arrived at Patricia's house. The white 2-story house was festively decorated for Thanksgiving. A pine wreath hung on the front door, and warm light spilled from the windows. Robert excitedly jumped out of the car, but Carol hesitated for a moment. Then she took a deep breath and told herself, this is a new beginning. It will be different this time. The front door opened, and Patricia and Vanessa appeared. Their smiles were perfect, but Carol noticed something in their eyes. Was it genuine warmth, or something else? "You're finally here. I've been waiting so long to celebrate Thanksgiving together. Your room is upstairs at the far end. I've prepared the room next to it for Robert." As Patricia announced this in the entrance hall, Vanessa quickly added, "I cleaned it for you." Something in those words sent a chill down Carol's spine. It sounded like charity. Thank you, Carol answered briefly and took Robert's hand up the stairs. Entering the room, she found white towels placed on the bed and artificial flower arrangements by the window. It was like a hotel room. Carol looked out the window that faced the backyard and could see the maple tree she had planted with her father. The tree had grown large and turned red. It's a very quiet house, Robert said in a small voice. Carol forced a smile. It'll get livelier at dinner time. When Carol went to the kitchen to help with dinner preparations, Patricia and Vanessa were arguing about the turkey stuffing. They paused their conversation momentarily to look at her. I thought I'd help, Carol said, and her mother shook her head. You're a guest. We can manage. Feeling uncomfortable, Carol replied, oh. But let me know if there's anything I can do. Of course, Vanessa smiled, but her eyes were cold. By the way, where's Robert? He's reading in his room. The long trip tired him out. What a strange child. A 6-year-old boy reading books, Vanessa said. All the children I know want to play outside. Carol suppressed the urge to argue. Robert is a bit introverted. But he has his own ways of enjoying himself. After about 30 minutes, Patricia asked, could you clean up the living room for tomorrow? Many relatives will be coming. Confused about whether she was a guest or help, Carol headed to the living room. While cleaning windows, she noticed a familiar photo frame on the shelf. It was from their last Christmas with her father. But looking closely, she saw that the part where she had been in the photo had been cut out. Only her father, Vanessa, and Patricia remained. Pain shot through Carol's chest. After dinner, when Robert had gone to bed, Carol went downstairs for a glass of water. She heard her mother and sister's voices from the living room. Will everything be ready by tomorrow? Patricia's voice. Don't worry. I had the lawyer check the documents. Even if Carol says something, there's no legal problem. Carol held her breath. What were they talking about? As she approached, Vanessa came out and stopped, surprised. You're still up. There was panic in Vanessa's voice. I just came to get some water, Carol maintained her composure. Vanessa looked back at Patricia and exchanged a glance. Tomorrow will be a busy day. You should rest early. Carol nodded obediently, poured water into a glass, and returned upstairs. Entering her room, she found Robert lying on the bed with his eyes closed, but his breathing wasn't that of a sleeping child. Robert, are you awake? Carol asked softly, and her son slowly opened his eyes. Mom, I'm scared of them. Them? You mean Grandma and Aunt? Robert nodded. When I was playing, Grandma said to Auntie, that child looks like Carol, doesn't he? And then she said, that's a problem. Carol hugged her son. Don't worry about it. It's adult talk. But she herself felt anxious. What were her mother and sister planning? On Thanksgiving morning, the house was already bustling with activity. The smell of roasting turkey wafted from the kitchen, and the living room was decorated with tablecloths and flowers. Relatives began arriving around 9 o'clock. 2 aunts from her mother's side with their husbands, cousin Ellen and her family, and even close friends from the neighborhood. Carol greeted relatives she hadn't seen in a long time, but their reactions were strange. Everyone seemed momentarily surprised to see her, and conversations remained superficial. Meanwhile, Vanessa was surrounded by people, laughing. Carol, it's been a while, her cousin Ellen approached. Robert has grown up nicely. Thank you, Carol smiled. She had been close with Ellen since childhood. How are your children? They're in college. They couldn't come home today, Ellen hesitated before continuing, you know, Carol. I recently heard from Aunt Patricia. At that moment, Vanessa interrupted. Ellen, could you help me with something? Ellen stopped what she was about to say and looked apologetically at Carol. Later, then. Carol found Robert reading alone by the window. The relatives' children weren't approaching him at all. Carol sat next to her son and asked, "Having fun?" "Yes, but everyone looks at me strangely." Just as Carol was about to say something, her mother's voice called from the kitchen, "Everyone, dinner is almost ready." The table was set, and the turkey and side dishes were laid out. As relatives began taking their seats, Carol was about to pull out a chair. But at that moment, Patricia grabbed her arm. "Carol, would you take pictures for us?" "Pictures? But the meal is about to." "If you take the pictures, we can have nice photos of everyone around the table." Patricia's voice was sweet, but her eyes were cold. Ellen asked curiously, "Why don't you join the photo, Carol?" Vanessa said expressionlessly, "She's staff, not a guest." The room fell silent. Carol stood frozen. Patricia nodded slightly and said, "That's right, we decided to have her help today," and handed Carol the camera. Robert approached his mother, looking worried about her expression. Carol took a deep breath and accepted the camera without saying anything. Her chest burned with anger and humiliation, but she couldn't explode emotionally in front of her son. "Everyone, please gather around the table," Carol said as she held up the camera. She was desperately trying to keep her voice from trembling. After taking the third picture, Carol checked the display. Everyone in the family was smiling. Only Robert, at the edge, wore an anxious expression. He seemed to be the only one who sensed the abnormal situation. "I got some good pictures," Carol said, controlling her emotions. Inside, a violent anger was swirling. "Staff? Not a family member, but a servant?" Patricia nodded with satisfaction and said, "Thank you for taking the pictures," as she took back the camera. Her voice had a hypocritical sweetness. "Could you help serve in the kitchen too?" It was a command. Though phrased as a question, there was no choice. Carol looked straight into her mother's eyes. Patricia's eyes showed no emotion. It was as if she were looking at a stranger. "All right," Carol answered briefly. As she was about to head to the kitchen, a small hand tugged at her sleeve. It was Robert. His face was pale, and his lips were trembling. "Mom." His voice was a whisper. "We shouldn't stay here. Let's go home right now." Carol looked at her son, startled. Robert's eyes were wide with fear. She had never seen him so frightened. "What's wrong?" Carol bent down to her son's eye level. "Are you feeling sick?" Robert shook his head. "No, but we can't stay here." "Why?" At Carol's question, Robert looked around cautiously. The relatives were engrossed in their meal, and no one was paying attention to them. Robert lowered his voice even further and said, "Last night, when I got up to go to the bathroom, I heard Grandma and Auntie talking." Carol placed her hand on her son's shoulder. "What were they talking about?" "At first I wanted to listen because they were talking about me," Robert faltered. "But then they started saying scary things." Carol's heart began to race. "What kind of things?" Grandma said, "We'll do it tomorrow night, after Carol falls asleep." Auntie asked, "Do you have the syringe ready?" and Carol held her breath. Alarms were ringing in her head. "What else?" Carol's voice was surprisingly calm even to herself. "They were talking about medicine. Grandma said, this way she'll never be able to claim the inheritance again." Robert's voice was trembling. Then Auntie said, "We'll use the same method as with Dad, right?" For a moment, Carol's world stopped. Her father's death. They said it was a sudden heart attack. But she remembered that the day before his death, her father had also been excluded from the family, treated as staff. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now memories flashed back. Her father's brother had also died suddenly. Heart attack. After being treated as staff. She had thought it was just a coincidence, but... "Mom, I'm scared," Robert's voice brought her back to reality. Carol touched her son's cheek. It's okay. Don't worry. Thoughts were racing through her mind. Michael's life insurance. Her father's inheritance. And the documents she had seen her mother and sister with this morning. It all started to connect. Had they been embezzling family assets for years? And eliminating anyone who got in their way? Carol. What are you doing? Vanessa's sharp voice came through. She was leaning out of the kitchen door, not hiding her irritation. Everyone's waiting. Carol slowly stood up. I'll be right there. Vanessa looked at Robert suspiciously. Is he all right? Is he feeling sick? The fake concern in those words. Carol looked into her sister's eyes. Something was floating there. Anxiety? Or fear? He's fine. Just a little tired, Carol maintained her composure. Robert, rest here for a bit. I'll be right back. Robert nodded silently. There was an adult-like understanding in his eyes. Carol went to the kitchen. Serving plates were lined up on the counter, along with containers of sauce. Vanessa was pouring wine into glasses. Could you take this to Aunt Patricia's table? Vanessa said with a smile, but her eyes weren't smiling. Carol took the wine glass and said, of course. Then she added, Vanessa, what do you think about Dad's death? Vanessa's hand trembled for a moment. What are you talking about? That was 10 years ago. Yes. But I've been thinking about it lately. Carol deliberately kept it vague. There were several strange things. What are you trying to say? Vanessa's voice turned cold. Nothing. Just wondering, Carol shrugged. But I've also started looking into Michael's insurance money. It seems some money never came to me after his death. The blood drained from Vanessa's face. Nonsense. Is it? Carol said calmly. I'm thinking of having a lawyer check it out. As Vanessa was about to say something, Patricia entered the kitchen. What are you doing? Everyone is waiting. Carol turned to her mother. I'm sorry. We were talking. Patricia noticed Vanessa's expression and frowned. What happened? Nothing, Vanessa quickly answered. Carol was just asking about Dad. Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly. Why suddenly bring that up? I remembered something. How Dad was called of staff at the last Thanksgiving, Carol said quietly. And the next day, he died of a heart attack. Silence filled the room. Patricia's expression hardened, and only the sound of the kitchen clock could be heard. Carol, Patricia finally spoke. What are you thinking? Nothing. Just a coincidence, Carol picked up a plate. Let's serve the meal. Carol went back and forth to the dining room, carrying plates and dishes. In her head, she was formulating an escape plan. First, secretly gather their belongings. Then get into the car with Robert and leave this cursed house. She could collect evidence later. The relatives were enjoying the turkey and sides, engaged in lively conversation. Nobody seemed to notice her unusual state. Or if they did, they were ignoring it. Carol only exchanged glances with her cousin Ellen. Questions and concern floated in Ellen's eyes. After placing the last plate, Carol casually went to Robert. Her son hadn't touched his food and was sitting rigid in his chair. He seems to be feeling a bit sick, Carol said loud enough for others to hear. I'll let him rest upstairs. Patricia looked up. Is he all right? Shouldn't he eat something? Something lurking behind that kindness. Carol felt her skin crawl. Thank you. But I think he should lie down. As they climbed the stairs with Robert, Carol whispered to her son, I'm going to pack our things. Quietly, quickly. As soon as they entered the room, Carol opened her suitcase. Pack only the essentials. Passport, wallet, cell phone. A few of Robert's clothes. She took a small bag from the corner of the room. It contained her laptop and notes recording her questions about her father's death. "Mom, where are we going?" Robert asked in a small voice. "To a safe place," Carol touched her son's cheek. "Be brave for just a little longer. Can you do that?" Robert nodded. His eyes showed fear but also determination. "We'll go out through the back door. Be careful not to be seen by anyone." After finishing packing, Carol listened. The meal seemed to be continuing. Laughter and conversation could be heard from downstairs. She took her son's hand and quietly descended the stairs. The back door was at the back of the kitchen. However, the moment she stepped into the kitchen, Carol froze. Vanessa was standing in front of the refrigerator. "Leaving already?" Vanessa's voice was cold as ice. Her gaze was fixed on the suitcase Carol was carrying. "Robert isn't feeling well," Carol maintained her composure. "Actually, he's been running a fever. I'm taking him to the hospital." Vanessa looked at Robert with doubtful eyes. Carol put her hand on her son's forehead and said, "You still have a fever." "I see," Vanessa's voice showed she didn't believe it. "But weren't you supposed to stay tonight? Patricia prepared a room for you." "I'm sorry, but my child's health comes first," Carol smiled. "When Robert gets better, we'll come again." Vanessa was about to say something when Ellen entered the kitchen. "Is something wrong?" "Robert has a fever," Carol quickly answered. "I'm taking him to the hospital." "That's terrible," Ellen said worriedly. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Vanessa couldn't hide her irritation. "It's fine. Carol can handle it herself." "Thank you, Ellen." Carol gave her cousin a grateful look. Then she said to her sister, "Give my regards to Mother." Ellen's presence seemed to make Vanessa hesitate. Carol took the opportunity to head for the back door. "See you." Outside, the cold night air filled her lungs. She loaded their luggage into the car and secured Robert with a seatbelt. As she started the engine, she looked at the house in the rearview mirror. Vanessa was watching them from the window. "It's okay," Carol told Robert. "We're safe now." But deep inside, she knew they weren't safe yet. It was too far to return to New York. Carol decided to look for a motel in a nearby town. They arrived in Clark's Summit, a small town about 30 minutes from Scranton, and found the Mountain View a motel. It looked clean. As soon as they entered the room, Carol locked the door and closed the curtains. Robert sat on the bed, still trembling. "Mom, are Grandma and Auntie bad people?" Carol sat next to her son. "They made bad choices. But we're safe now. Can we go home again?" "Of course. We'll go back to our home in New York." Carol hugged her son. "Now, let's get some rest." After Robert fell asleep, Carol opened her laptop. She began examining all records related to her father's death. The death certificate stated, natural death due to heart attack. However, her father had no history of heart problems. And after his death, a huge insurance payout had been made. It was an insurance policy Carol had never seen. She also checked her deceased husband Michael's documents. Indeed, insurance money had been paid after his death. But she had received less than expected. Carol sent an email to lawyer Alex Shapiro. She wanted to meet first thing tomorrow morning. Looking out the window, she saw it had started snowing. On Thanksgiving night, she had fled from her family. But this wasn't the end, it was the beginning of revealing the truth. The next morning, Carol headed to Alex's office. She left Robert at the motel for safety, asking the motel owner to keep an eye on him. "Carol, what happened?" Alex asked worriedly. He had been Michael's close friend. Carol told him everything that had happened yesterday. The conversation Robert had overheard, her mother and sister's suspicious behavior, and the similarities to her father's death. "This is serious," Alex frowned. "We need to investigate your father's death again." "What should I do?" "First, let's report this to the police." Then we'll investigate the death insurance payments for your father and husband, Alex said. I'll inquire with the insurance company. At the police station, Detective Jackson listened carefully to Carol's story. Do you have any evidence? My son overheard a conversation, and there are similar deaths in the past, Carol answered. We'll investigate, but honestly, it's a difficult case, Detective Jackson said. But we'll ensure your and your child's safety. Over the next few days, Carol and Robert continued to stay at the motel. While waiting for contact from Alex, Carol began reaching out to her father's friends and former colleagues. And surprising facts began to emerge one after another. The courtroom doors opened, and the judge entered. Carol stood up nervously, realizing that the months-long legal battle was finally coming to an end. The jury has reached a verdict. The jury foreman stood up and read from a paper. On the charge of first-degree murder against the defendant Patricia Wilson, we find the defendant guilty. On the conspiracy charge against the defendant Vanessa Wilson, we find the defendant guilty. A sigh of relief escaped in the courtroom. Tears welled up in Carol's eyes. It had been a long journey. The investigation revealed that Patricia had poisoned her husband 10 years ago and Carol's husband Michael 7 years ago. Michael's accident had been staged. The motive was insurance money and inheritance. The two had been embezzling family assets for years. As Carol left the courtroom, lawyer Alex was waiting. It's over, Carol. You won. I don't think I won, Carol quietly answered. The truth just came to light. The verdict was announced, with Patricia receiving a life sentence and Vanessa, with mitigating circumstances, a 15-year sentence. In court, Patricia refused to admit guilt until the end, insisting, I was only trying to protect my family. Vanessa shifted all responsibility to her mother to reduce her sentence, claiming she had only obeyed because she was threatened. 6 months after the trial ended, Carol formally received her father's inheritance. It included her father's diary, which revealed that Patricia had been psychologically abusing her father for years, and that her father had been trying to protect Carol. Just before his death, her father had tried to tell Carol everything. Dad. Carol hugged the diary to her chest and cried. A year later, at Christmas, Carol and Robert were spending peaceful time in their new home. The flower shop had expanded, and Carol had also started community support activities, which had been her father's dream too. Mom, the cookies are ready. Robert proudly showed her the cookies he had taken from the oven. At 7 years old, he was gradually overcoming the memories of that terrifying Thanksgiving. The phone rang, and when Carol picked up, it was her cousin Ellen. Carol. I thought you had the right to know, Ellen hesitated. Aunt Patricia attempted suicide in prison. She's alive, but her chances of recovery are slim. Carol took a deep breath. Complex emotions filled her chest. Thank you for letting me know, she answered quietly. And about Vanessa. Ellen continued. After learning about her mother's actions, she completely broke down mentally. She's receiving treatment, but... After hanging up, Robert looked up at his mother worriedly. Mom, are you okay? Carol hugged her son. I'm fine. We have a real family. Her father's smiling face appeared in her mind. And memories of happy days with Michael. The meaning of a real family based on trust and love rather than blood ties was something Carol would build with Robert. Outside the window, snow had begun to fall quietly. With the feeling of a new year and a new beginning.